was filled with quiet pride, the kind that settles into the chest when people sit a little straighter without realizing why. Rows of polished chairs faced the stage, flags standing tall at either side, their colors vivid beneath the bright ceremonial lights. Families whispered softly. Veterans adjusted jackets that no longer fit quite the way they once did. The air carried a sense of order, tradition, and expectation. This was supposed to be a moment of honor, a moment of remembrance, a moment that followed rules so precise they had been written decades ago and never questioned since. No one noticed the old man at first. He sat near the back, closer to the aisle than the center, his hands folded calmly in his lap. His suit was dark but worn, pressed carefully yet clearly old. The fabric had softened with time, the edges slightly frayed in places where newer clothes would still be stiff. He wore no visible medals, no ribbons, no insignia that caught the eye. His hair was thin and silver, combed neatly back, and his shoulders sloped in a way that suggested age rather than weakness. He looked like someone who had learned long ago how to take up as little space as possible. The ceremony continued exactly as planned. An officer approached the podium. The national anthem began, and as if guided by instinct rather than sound, the old man stood before anyone else did. He placed his hand over his heart with a precision that came from muscle memory, not imitation. His lips moved silently, forming words long memorized. When the anthem ended, he sat again, slower now, careful with his knees, his face unreadable. That was when the first whisper started. A young staff member leaned toward another, pointing subtly toward the back. A clipboard was checked. A finger traced down a list of names. The whisper spread like a crack in glass. Quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. Eyes began to turn, quick glances at first, then longer looks. The old man felt it before he saw it. He always did. That familiar shift in the air. The sense of being out of place without knowing why. Two uniformed security personnel began walking down the aisle. Their steps were measured, professional, not aggressive. They were doing their jobs. Protocol was clear. Everyone seated in that section had been pre-registered. Credentials had been checked twice. No deviations were allowed, especially not during a ceremony that would be recorded, archived, and remembered. When something didn't match the list, it had to be corrected. Quietly if possible, quickly if necessary. The old man looked up as they approached. His eyes were sharp, clearer than people expected them to be. He didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He simply nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging an order he already understood. People around him shifted uncomfortably. A woman 2 seats away glanced down, pretending not to notice. A man nearby frowned, his jaw tightening. No one spoke. No one intervened. It was easier to assume there had been a mistake. Easier to believe the system knew what it was doing. One of the guards leaned in, whispering something polite but firm. The old man listened, then slowly placed his hands on the armrests of his chair. His movements were careful, deliberate. He stood, straightening his back as much as his body allowed. For a brief moment something changed in his posture. Not enough for most to notice, but enough. Enough that the commanding officer on stage paused mid-sentence. The CO had seen countless ceremonies. He knew how the room felt when everything was routine, and he knew when something wasn't. His eyes had caught that momentary shift, that instinctive correction of posture that didn't belong to just anyone. He followed the line of sight, watching as the old man stepped into the aisle, flanked gently by security. The CO didn't say anything yet. The old man didn't resist. He never had. As they guided him toward the exit, he glanced once toward the stage. Not pleading, not angry, just observant, as if taking in details one last time. The flags, the lights, the faces. That was when the CO raised his hand. The microphone picked up the sound of his palm hitting the podium. Sharp, final. Stop. The word echoed through the room, cutting through murmurs and movement alike. Security froze. The audience stiffened. Every eye turned forward. The CO stepped away from the podium, his gaze fixed on the old man. His expression had changed, hardened into something unreadable. "Sit him down," he said. The guards hesitated for half a second, then obeyed. The old man returned to his seat, confusion flickering across his face for the first time. The CO took a breath, scanning the room slowly before speaking again. "Before anyone moves," he said, his voice steady but loud, "we're going to correct something that should never have happened." A hush fell over the room, heavier than silence. People leaned forward without realizing it. Somewhere, a camera operator adjusted focus. The CO looked directly at the old man. "Sir," he said, his voice changing now, softer, edged with something else. "How long have you been waiting to be recognized?" The old man swallowed. His hands trembled slightly as he answered, quietly, "Most of my life." The room didn't breathe. It felt as though every person present had collectively forgotten how. The CO didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped down from the stage, each footstep deliberate, echoing through the hall with a weight that had nothing to do with sound. He stopped a few feet from the old man, standing at attention without realizing he had done so. The kind of attention drilled into someone long before rank ever followed. The old man noticed. His eyes flicked to the CO's boots, then up to his face. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or memory, or simply the quiet understanding shared by people who had stood in the same storms, even if years apart. The CO turned to face the audience. "Many of you are wondering why this ceremony was just interrupted," he said. "You're wondering why an elderly man without visible credentials was nearly escorted out. And some of you," he paused, letting the words settle, "already decided he didn't belong here." A ripple of discomfort moved through the seats. "Let me tell you a story," the CO continued, "because what you see on the surface doesn't always tell you who someone is, especially in this room." He gestured gently toward the old man, then took a step back, giving him space without abandoning him. 47 years ago, the CO said, there was a unit operating under conditions most people will never experience. No cameras, no public recognition, no expectation of survival, let alone honor. Their mission never appeared in newspapers. Their names never made it into speeches. The old man stared straight ahead, his jaw tightening. That unit existed to do one thing, the CO went on. Make sure others didn't have to. As the CO spoke, the room seemed to shift, as if the past were pressing in from the walls themselves. The old man's mind drifted, uninvited, into memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Dust in the air, the weight of equipment cutting into his shoulders, the sound of boots on gravel at 3 in the morning. Orders given without explanation, because explanation wasn't a luxury they could afford. He remembered the first time he realized nobody would ever know what they were doing. The way his commanding officer had said it plainly, without ceremony. You won't be thanked. You won't be remembered. You will not exist on paper. And if something goes wrong, there will be no one to blame and no one to save you. The old man had nodded then, just like he nodded now, because that was the job. The CO continued speaking, his voice carrying a careful balance of authority and restraint. One member of that unit, he said, was responsible for decisions that altered outcomes we still study today. Not because of glory, not because of medals, but because of consequences. He turned back to the old man. Sir, he asked, do you remember the night the convoy rerouted? The old man's breath caught, just for a second, but it was enough. Yes, he said, I remember. The CO nodded once, sharply. That decision, he said, addressing the audience again, saved over 100 lives, people who went on to have families, careers, futures, people who never knew how close they came to not existing. Murmurs spread, no longer whispers now, but quiet expressions of shock. And yet, the CO added, his voice tightening, the man who made that call went home to silence. No parade, no citation, no acknowledgement. The old man shifted in his seat, his hands clenched, then relaxed. He had told himself long ago that recognition didn't matter. That doing the job was enough. That memory was a burden, not a reward. But standing there, in that room, with eyes finally seeing him instead of through him, something stirred that he hadn't prepared for. The CO straightened. "This ceremony," he said, "is about honoring service. All service. Even the kind that never asked to be seen." He turned fully toward the old man and saluted. The sound of boots snapping together echoed like a thunderclap. For a moment no one else moved. Then, slowly, row by row, veterans stood. Not because they were told to, but because they understood. The old man tried to stand, panic flickering as his knees protested. Two people beside him helped without thinking. He rose, unsteady but upright, his eyes wet now, though no tears fell. The CO lowered his salute, stepping closer. "On behalf of everyone who never knew your name," he said quietly, "thank you." The room erupted into applause. Not the polite kind. The kind that comes from the chest, raw and uncontrolled. The old man bowed his head, overwhelmed, the sound washing over him like something he had never expected to feel again. For the first time in decades, he wasn't invisible. The applause continued longer than anyone anticipated, stretching past comfort, past protocol, until it became something else entirely. It wasn't just appreciation. It was release. Years of unspoken gratitude finding a place to land. The old man stood there, supported on either side, his breathing uneven, his mind struggling to reconcile the noise with the silence he had lived in for so long. When the room finally quieted, it wasn't because the CO demanded it. It was because the moment had said everything words could not. The CO returned to the podium, but the ceremony no longer felt like a performance. Felt like a reckoning. "There are many like him," the CO said, gesturing once more toward the old man. "Men and women whose contributions were buried under classifications, whose sacrifices were hidden behind redacted pages." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "We cannot change the past," he continued, "but we can choose how we honor it." The rest of the ceremony unfolded differently than planned. Names were read with more care. Stories were told with more humility. Every applause felt heavier, more intentional. The old man remained seated near the front now, placed there by invitation rather than suspicion. People approached him quietly during transitions, shaking his hand, thanking him, some with tears in their eyes. He accepted it all with gentle nods, his voice rarely rising above a whisper. Inside he felt something loosen, not pride, not regret, something closer to peace. He thought of the nights he had woken up sweating, the faces he never forgot, the moments that lived only in his mind. He thought of how many times he had told himself that being forgotten was the price of doing what needed to be done. Maybe, he realized, being remembered didn't have to erase the sacrifice. Maybe it could honor it instead. As the ceremony came to a close, the CO approached him one final time. "You should have been on that list," the CO said quietly. The old man smiled faintly. "I never expected to be," he replied. The CO nodded. "That changes today." They shook hands not as ranks, but as equals. When the old man finally left the hall, he did so slowly, his steps careful, his back still bent with age. But something had shifted. He walked out not as someone removed, but as someone recognized. Outside, the air was cool. The noise faded behind him. He paused for a moment, looking up at the sky, letting the quiet settle. For the first time in a long time, the silence felt different, felt earned. Years later, people would still talk about that ceremony. Not because of the speeches or the schedule, but because of the moment everything stopped. Because of the lesson it carried. That respect isn't always obvious. That service doesn't always wear medals. That sometimes the greatest sacrifices are the ones history almost erases. And because one commanding officer chose to look closer, and one veteran, nearly removed, finally stood exactly where he belonged. Subscribe my YouTube channel Old Man Stories Teller.